We're so glad to be here with you all and be back with you. We've enjoyed our association with the ACC, not just here in the DFW area, but throughout our footprint. We've been very active in Louisiana, Mississippi, and in the Florida chapter as well. So it's a wide-ranging association with us that we've really enjoyed and appreciate the opportunity to be with you. We've got an incredible treat for you today. We really do, and one that I'm excited about. Phelps has put together an unbelievable group of organized criminal defense lawyers. And we haven't just gone from the defense side. We've actually put together a team that is led by 4 different former U.S. attorneys. And we've got 2 of them here today. 2 of them are getting ready for a trial and weren't able to join us today. I've been as a commercial litigator, I've been on the business end of the Department of Justice on behalf of clients in defending cases that they've had, both criminal and civil claims and False Claims Act, fraud investigations, and it's not fun being on that end of it. The power of the federal government in an investigation is unbelievable. The treatment you get from the court is unbelievable. I tried a criminal antitrust case a number of years ago, and every single objection I made during the entire trial was overruled. I didn't get one objection sustained, and they were good objections too. But the thing that I also learned is nobody can put together an investigation, whether you're talking about an internal investigation or you're talking about an investigation into a case itself like the Department of Justice. And having 4 different U.S. attorneys and a number of assistant U.S. attorneys that do the work has given us just an unbelievable team to be able to represent our clients. I'm really, really proud. I'm excited because I have so much respect for this team. It's unbelievable. And have them here for you, I was really, really happy we were able to bring them in. Let me introduce them real quick. On the far end, Mike Hurst is the former U.S. attorney out of Mississippi. He just completed his term in the last election and joined us. I sat down with Mike one time and said, hey, I've got this fraud case. And watching him delve into it and figure out what the real fraud was and what was going on was incredible. So we're really, really happy to have him. Walt Green is a former U.S. attorney out of the Eastern District of Louisiana. Middle District. Baton Rouge.
No, that's Harry.
Harry Rosenberg is another one of our former U.S. attorneys that was the former U.S. attorney in New Orleans. So between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, we've got the state covered. But in addition to being the U.S. attorney, he also served in the Marine Corps for 20 years and was in Fallujah, after the Battle of Fallujah, advising the Iraqi prosecutors as they were going forward on those claims as well. So retired as a colonel and is very, very active with our firm, heads up our white collar, does an awful lot of the internal investigations, healthcare fraud actions as well. Candace Gregory is really unique. Candace was an assistant U.S. attorney, but she was assigned both civil and criminal matters. One of the very rare situations in the Department of Justice where she handled both civil and criminal side. And before that, she was working for the state of Mississippi AG's office there. And so it brings a wealth of experience to us as well. Sean Clark was an assistant U.S. attorney. He saw the bright side and came over to the defense side many, many years ago in offices both out of Houston and out of our New Orleans office. You remember the BP oil spill, the Deepwater Horizon. He defended one of the key parties and got a not guilty verdict on that case. The Boston Varsity Blues with all the college admissions. He also was very instrumental in defending parties in that case as well. So he's got an amazing background, and I'm really, really proud to have this team here to talk to you about some of the internal investigations and trends that are going on in the Department of Justice. So Sean, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Blake. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being here. You know, we're 2 years into the Biden administration, but you know, the wheels of government sometimes turn slowly, and so we're just seeing kind of some of the policies that have been enacted come into play. And so what's interesting, particularly about the 4 former United States attorneys at our firm, is they each was nominated by a different president. Walt was nominated by President Obama. Mike, nominated by President Trump. Harry Rosenberg, nominated by George H.W. Bush. And Brian Albritton in the Middle District of Florida, which is Tampa and Orlando, actually was nominated by the second President Bush. And that's useful and Candace and I, we're the non-former U.S. attorneys in the firm. But Candace joined our firm. She worked as an AUSA under Mike, and I had worked as an AUSA under Harry Rosenberg. So we're now seeing the Biden policies come into play, and I thought it might be interesting just before we start to hear from Mike and/or Walt about, as the U.S. attorneys who came in at the beginning of a new administration, what happens there? You have 93 U.S. attorneys' offices out in the country, and does the message get out? Do things change? How does that work?
Sure. I'll go first and then turn it over to Mike. But yeah, so when a new administration comes in, certainly you're going to get a new AG, Deputy Attorney General, and certainly different political parties and viewpoints. You're going to have different goals to succeed by. So when a new president comes in, it goes channels down to the Attorney General, and he or she can influence that in a lot of different ways. One can be the budget. He or she can offer different positions, whether it's civil rights, or whether it's FCPA, whatever area they want to focus on, they can actually give you additional personnel and devote more time and money to it. They can require you to report that type of information, and that can reflect on your office. But you have the national priorities, and then, as far as I could ever see, they give you the local priorities that you can deal with on your own. Say for Baton Rouge, we have a lot of the chemical corridor in our district. So that was one thing that we were concerned about with the EPA. Likewise, we had violent crime that we wanted to devote resources to. They, of course, Main Justice never would try to impact that. They want you to be closer to the ground and be able to react to the issues that you have in your own district.
So yeah, exactly what Walt said. Department issues overall, guiding principles, priorities they have. We had a number of priorities in the Trump administration. One being violent crime, one of the biggest ones. But you also have a lot of freedom, a lot of leeway in the individual U.S. attorney's offices. What I didn't know when I became United States Attorney is you get into this group, and now you all of a sudden have contacts in all the 94 U.S. attorney's offices in the entire country. So if I've got a case in Dallas, I can call up Erin Neely Cox, and she can help me with the people in her office who handle FCPA or handle white-collar crime. That's one of the great things now about coming back into private practice is we have those contacts all over the country. And as Blake mentioned, not only do we have incredible former assistant United States attorneys in Sean and Candace, but Walt and I were actually lowly assistant United States attorneys as well. And so we've actually prosecuted cases, we've tried the cases, and so to see it from different perspectives, both being in the courtroom, in the trial, and then being head of those offices and having those contacts across the country has really helped us in our practice now back in criminal defense.
And before we start, I just want to say it is interesting. You guys both had been assistant U.S. attorneys. I know Harry Rosenberg was sort of legendary. He came in, he'd never been a prosecutor, never done criminal law, and we had, I guess, 70 or 80 attorneys in the office at that time. And to educate himself, Harry read every pleading that went out. So I do think it's a challenge for a new person coming in who doesn't have that prior experience. But in any event, 2 years into the Biden administration, let's take a look at what they've indicated will be their priorities. And it starts with rhetoric. The Attorney General, who's kind of a soft-spoken fellow, said the Justice Department's interest in prosecuting corporate crime has waxed and waned over time. Today, it is waxing again. The Deputy Attorney General, Lisa Monaco, is not quite as soft-spoken. And so here's what she had to say. Cases against corporate executives are among some of the most difficult that the department brings, and that means the government may lose some of those cases. But I have and will continue to make clear to our prosecutors that as long as we act consistent with the principles of federal prosecution, the fear of losing should not deter them. We will urge prosecutors to be bold in holding accountable those who commit criminal conduct. So now, and I'm hoping we might get a little differing viewpoints here on this. What's your reaction to that, Candace, as a former line prosecutor, now a defense lawyer?
I think that it's pretty strong messaging, and we'll get to this later, but I had the opportunity to sit in on the Deputy Attorney General's last speech, and they are certainly holding true to what she announced in this particular speech. But I think that it's strong messaging. You can see the difference, and I think it's interesting. Mike talked about the things that were at the forefront of the administration when he and I were at the U.S. Attorney's Office together. To see the shift now, it's interesting to watch, and to be in the room with the DAG and be among other criminal defense attorneys. She wants us to know so that we can advise our clients that this is the direction the department is going in, and they have consistent policies. They are now trying cases more than they have in the last 5 years that involve corporations and individuals within those corporations.
And Walter, Mike, what's your reaction to this?
I think it's great that she's giving everybody the green light. If you're a prosecutor, this is what you want to hear, right? We're going to give you the resources. You can go to trial, and we're not going to hold it against you if you lose, because in the Department of Justice, you're supposed to win at trial. You know, you're going to win 98% of the time. It's either going to plea or you're going to be found, you're going to find them guilty. But in here, she's saying, hey, quit being so safe. Take some chances. In fact, we're going to reward you for taking these chances, which is a little bit of a sea change from Main Justice.
Yeah, and I would just go back to the numbers. You know, we don't get a lot of numbers out of the DOJ unless the leadership is talking about numbers. Ken Polite, who's the Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division, guy from New Orleans, former U.S. Attorney in New Orleans during the Obama administration, he said back in January at Georgetown, he said the Fraud Division of Main Justice has had 250 convictions last year. 250 convictions last year. That is more than the Fraud Division has convicted in the last 5 years. And that involved 7 corporate resolutions. MLARS, which is the money laundering asset forfeiture section, they had over a dozen convictions last year, including 2 corporate resolutions. One corporate resolution involved the forfeiture of $2 billion. I guess I should do my Dr. Evil. $2 billion forfeiture with MLARS. So, yeah, this is not just rhetoric. This is not just talk. This was a speech she gave back in 2021. And now here we are in March of 2023, and we're seeing the numbers reflecting the direction she gave.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to give you a little different perspective, and it comes from, frankly, here's my view. I think when prosecutors get bold, they indict people they wouldn't have otherwise indicted. And sometimes those people are innocent. And sometimes the government tries to stretch the boundaries, in my view, of the law places it shouldn't. Example, Harry Rosenberg and I defended a case, the Grand Isle Shipyard case, where the government, in the aftermath of Deepwater Horizon, tried to hold contractors liable for criminal violations of the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act. And, it was pretty clear Oak's Law didn't apply to contractors, but it took a district court and the Fifth Circuit to tell them that. I will tell you, in a couple of highly publicized cases, the Deepwater Horizon, in my view, they needed a body. They indicted 4 BP employees on 48 different felony charges. They got 0 felony convictions. 2 BP employees went to trial and found not guilty. 2 pled guilty to minor misdemeanors. But the prosecutors who brought those indictments were long gone. And frankly, Varsity Blues. I represented the Wake Forest University volleyball coach. And in my view, and Mike's former colleague may not like hearing this, but that's too bad.
Andy's pretty outspoken, but go ahead.
Yeah. In fact, to be honest, we were going to ask for extra peremptory challenges based on statements he'd made at his press conference.
He's a good Boston guy.
Yeah.
They talk. So.
But in any event, ultimately, thankfully, there was a change in U.S. attorney and there was a change in the assistant U.S. attorneys, and we were able to go in and say, you shouldn't have indicted this man. And thankfully, they agreed to withdraw the indictment. I guess it's 27 years now of being on the other side. I think there's plenty of ironclad cases out there to keep all the lawyers at DOJ busy. And when you start indicting people you otherwise wouldn't, I'm not sure I'm a huge fan of that. But in any event, so there's rhetoric, and let's talk about, I think Walt and Mike, you mentioned how they back it up with resources. Here's the Biden budget. First of all, in 2021, the fraud section, which Mike mentioned is now brought in 250 convictions last year, hired 34 new prosecutors. Fiscal year 22 budget request, and I'm going to ask you all to comment on this in a minute, funding 900 white-collar focused FBI agents. Fiscal year 24, hiring 65 additional federal prosecutors in the criminal division at the Department of Justice, and that's in addition to hiring that occurs in U.S. attorneys' offices. And then fiscal year 24, hiring of 185 additional in U.S. attorneys' offices. So that's 250 new positions for prosecutors. What does this tell us?
Well, I think it tells you put your money where your mouth is. I mean, this is priorities. Where your money goes, there go your priorities. As you mentioned, 250 additional prosecutors just in criminal division and U.S. attorneys' offices around the country. That FY24 number, just so you know, for the criminal division, that's a 12% increase from just last year. They're asking for 12% more. 28 million is 12% more, and the almost 240 million for U.S. attorney's office. That's almost a 10% increase. And again, those numbers, and get back to FY22 budget, almost 1,000 FBI agents for white collar. Not FBI agents for violent crime, not FBI agents for international terrorism, whatever, for white collar. I mean, that's pretty incredible. And again, I think it shows you the priorities of the DOJ.
Yes, sir.
So, sorry if I'm...
No, please, everybody.
I just quickly looked at those last two rows, and so the green one is $440,000 per prosecutor. The purple one's $1.3 million per prosecutor, and so it doesn't make sense to me because I know that they're not getting paid $1.3 million, and so I'm sure some of that's headhunting costs, but that's still really steep.
Well,
What
you
does
should
this mean?
you should talk to your member of Congress about
congressman, senator.
spending in the federal government. We don't know where those numbers come from. I'm sure there are.
Well, those numbers come directly from their budget. Those numbers come directly. We don't know where the money goes.
Right, that's
if
what I
they
meant.
get the money, but that comes directly from the department, the president's budget he just released a couple weeks ago.
And so, Candace, as someone who's been in the office and who's made cases, do you find significance in the fact of as Mike mentioned, 900 white-collar focused FBI agents?
Absolutely. And
Why is that?
When we were going through this presentation, I was shocked to see the number of FBI agents that they're asking to hire just for white collar. But number one, because there's so much other crime that I think that we could be focused on right now. So to see that those agents will be focused solely on white crime, that's incredible.
And how are cases generated? How do they get to
The
prosecutors?
agents bring them to the U.S. Attorney's Office. So to see that there are 900, they're going to be 900 white-collar focused FBI agents, that means that there may be 10 or 20 coming to like my old district at one time with cases for every prosecutor in that office. So that certainly means that they intend to rev up the white-collar cases.
So I'll just, from personal experience, I have some bad news for y'all here in Dallas. It's been my experience.
Don't tell them bad news. Don't tell them bad news.
They need to know this.
Yeah.
They need to know this. It's been my experience that the U.S. Attorney's Office here has been one of the more effective and aggressive white-collar offices in the country. They do a lot of white-collar. They set a trend. I think some of the U.S. attorneys, Paul Coggins being one of them, established a standard. And in addition to that, you've got the SEC right down the road in Fort Worth. So for your clients, it's time to get them focused. So in any event,
And you're licensed in Texas, correct, Sean? Okay. Just want to make sure.
yeah. I have to admit, it is an irony when you're on the defense side hearing 900 white-collar focused FBI agents. There's a part of you thinks, It's going to help our budget. But in any event, I want to talk about one thing that really, deterrence. The government wants to deter corporate crime. And one way they've indicated they'll do that is that individuals will be targeted. And Walt, maybe if you could share with us, in the Obama administration, what happened? What was the Yates memo and what did it signal?
Sure. So Sally Yates, as you may remember, she was the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia initially. She then became the Deputy Attorney General under Loretta Lynch. And then finally, she served out as the Acting Attorney General before she was released by President Trump. So when Sally, I'll just call her Sally, probably if she came in the room, I wouldn't call her Sally, but I'm going to call her Sally right now, like we're really close. So Sally comes out with this memo, and she was very active, right? She was a very activist type of Deputy Attorney General, and she came out and she said, hey, we're going to refocus on corporate crime. We're going to refocus on prosecuting these matters. And if you want credit, if you as an institution want credit, if we're investigating you, you're going to have to turn over basically all the information, dirty information you have on your employees. Now, that was just a deal. If you didn't want to do that, that's fine. You just wouldn't get any deal. You wouldn't get any credit for that unless you were willing to turn over all that information. But in 2018, under your administration, it changed just slightly.
Mike, you've been promoted to the presidency.
Yes.
Yeah, so you can read substantially involved. If you wanted to get credit, all you had to do was turn over information related to those actors who were substantially involved. And so the criticism was that left a lot of discretion for corporations, companies, not to turn over a lot of stuff.
And of course, again, an additional part of the Yates memo, a corporation couldn't settle a case and get as part of that agreement that no individuals from the company would be prosecuted, which obviously is always the goal, to get a global resolution. But in any event, as Mike mentioned, there was a criticism that substantially involved left too much leeway about what to turn over. And so, Candace, maybe if you can share with us what's happened, and you heard the talk earlier this month by the Deputy AG, Lisa Monaco. What's happened most recently?
So most recently, and like I said, I think that it's interesting that she was saying this to a room of defense attorneys. At this point, she's amended this memo that we reference here from October 2021. She's now said that the department is going to pilot a 3-year program that's going to focus on voluntary self-disclosure and clawbacks to compensation. So she wants to see that, the department wants to see that the companies are holding itself responsible. She's really promoting compliance programs. And I thought that it was amazing to hear them say that they will not prosecute companies in cases where they voluntarily self-disclose. And I think that's a strong message to say they will not do it. They are favoring those situations where companies come forward to say this is what we found in our internal investigations and throughout our compliance programs.
And at the talk you were at earlier this month, and it's in the green here, we probably should have put this in red, because I know so many of you are in-house attorneys, and this is the message she wanted you to get. I want every general counsel, every executive, and every board member to take this message to heart. When your company discovers criminal misconduct, the pathway to the best resolution will involve prompt, voluntary self-disclosure to the Department of Justice.
I also think it's important to note that for the first time, there's a nationwide uniform policy. So there was a time when we can point out as defense attorneys, as a prosecutor, we could hear defense attorneys come in and say, well, look, this is what you did in Alaska in this case. So although I'm here in Dallas, I think that we should get the same deal. So now every U.S. Attorney's Office has these marching orders. So they know that if a company comes forward to self-disclose, that they will receive favor there.
And this actually was music to my ears, because one of the fears is you come in, you make a self-disclosure, and I've had clients who did that, and the government says, oh, well, that's great, and so your fine's only going to be $10 million instead of, it would have been $100.
But now they've indicated they will not seek a guilty plea where a
Correct.
company has voluntarily self-disclosed. And I think that goes hand in hand with the idea that we're going to deter individuals.
Well, LaShawn, let me pause for 1 second. They did not say they won't prosecute your company if you just self-disclose. What they said was they won't prosecute your company if you don't self-disclose, if you cooperate, and if you remediate. And self-disclosure is important, obviously, but those other two, those are really the heavy lifts, if you will. Self-disclosure is, you hire us, I mean, we're pretty good. We do an internal investigation for you. We go to our contacts in the various U.S. Attorney's offices around the country. The real heavy lift is after that. What are you doing for the government? How are you cooperating? What are you giving them in addition to? How are you pointing out the others who have done stuff within your organization? And then on the back end, we'll talk about this a little later, but remediation. That's a huge issue with this Department of Justice, more than any other Department of Justice that I've seen. And I will tell you that these Monaco amendments, March 2023, just a few weeks ago, that the Candace was at that speech. 2 years ago, when she announced the Monaco memo, she said DOJ's number one priority in corporate criminal matters is to prosecute individuals. So no longer are they just coming after the company, they're going after the individuals. And she said, quote, gamesmanship with disclosures or productions will not be tolerated. So they're drawing a line in the sand. And if you don't do it right, then your company can be penalized.
Yeah, and think about it like this. This is a real, to me, a sea change, right? They're almost forcing you and us, if we know about misconduct, to go run in and do self-disclosure, do remediation, make sure our compliance plan's in place to go and do that. So to me, it's a very interesting culture change, because instead of having one AUSA and one agent going to look for misconduct in the company, now the companies are going to come to them, and as she said, they will be rewarded, and hopefully they will. But so now it's not a sit and wait game almost, it's more of an urgency to make sure you have your facts and then go to DOJ and disclose.
And to Sean's earlier point, every company wants a global resolution. They want to hash this out, get a settlement, get done. The problem with that now is Dag Monaco said 2 years ago when she issued her memo that the priority will be on prosecuting individuals, and we, DOJ, will not resolve corporate cases until the individuals are individually prosecuted. So you can't come in, self-disclose, hope to get a quick settlement for your company if DOJ is also going after individuals.
So now, as the guy who's been a defense lawyer for more than a quarter century, I have to say the thing that makes me nervous here is I've had more than one situation where I think a corporate client has scapegoated somebody, because it's always, frankly, not your company's, but it's always in a company's interest to say this was a rogue employee, this was not part of our corporate culture. And so it does create an interesting situation. I will tell you, like in the Deepwater Horizon, and this is in the public record, BP paid the attorney's fees for the indicted individuals, but they wouldn't tell us, they wouldn't help us at all. They wouldn't tell us how to get to the restroom. It was like, you're on your own. And it's interesting. It's going to create interesting ethical dilemmas, and I will talk about that a little bit later with internal investigations. So in any event, what about what substantive areas the government is moving into? And I wonder, Walt, maybe if you could share with us what AG Monaco, I told you she was not as soft-spoken as the Attorney General. What has she said about sanctions, and why, irrespective of what business you're in, that should be of significance to you? Sure. When we look at the FCP, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, I'm sure y'all deal with this many times. It started off as kind of a sleepy little statute that no one really used, and then it starts ramping up. And now we know how vigorously, as you know, the compliance issues you have to deal with, certainly in overseas. But now the expansion of the FCPA has increased. So now they're looking at FCPA violations in your supply chain. If you're getting your products and someone in that supply chain is violating the FCPA, is some of that going to come on you as well? So that is a big change in the way that it's increasing.
And I think
even beyond the FCPA, sanctions enforcement alone, trading with sanctioned countries or individuals, she has said is the new FCPA. And as corporate counsel, and I saw some of the companies you work for, public companies, others, so you don't need to hear from me about the FCPA. But I think what is interesting about it. Oh, yes, sir.
Hey, I got a question based on that. Based on what you last said about the new enforcement program that gives companies credit to under the FCPA, you self-disclosed, when you told them everything, you still got screwed royally as a company. Does that portend good things for her policy of actually giving the company credit? Or do you think they're really going to give the company credit and let it off someone if they really turn?
Well, I'll let the guys who are, screwing these companies.
We're saving companies, people. We're saving
Over the last
companies.
12 years, answer that.
I've never prosecuted any FCPA cases. I would tell you what the Assistant Attorney General for Criminal Division, Ken Polite, said 2 months ago, and he was talking about FCPA, and he said the exact same thing Monica is saying, which is those three things. If you self-disclose, if you cooperate, and you remediate, the presumption is a declination of prosecution. Now, he didn't say it's a guarantee, because he listed not only those companies they declined to prosecute who did those three things, but he said there are also aggravating factors, whether it's the company's recidivated, whether the executives were involved in FCPA violations. Those things can still get your company prosecuted, even if you do those original three things. So it's a sliding scale, but the Criminal Division of the Department of Justice has updated its corporate enforcement policy to include these things, and at least now everybody's on notice on what they can do to try to get the best deal from DOJ.
And if I could,
And I think he's got another question.
Yeah. What's that? Yeah? You have to trust the government.
Yeah. We're from the government. We're here to help.
Right.
Walt?
I just want to piggyback on what Mike said about Ken Polite. He also gave a speech at the National Association of Compliance Officers. I don't know if anyone went to it, in the Northeast about 4 or 5 months ago, and he talked about compliance. And he was a former compliance officer of Energy located in New Orleans after he left for about a year, so he understands compliance, Fortune 500 company. And so he takes this a little bit personally when he says, when I tell you you have to have a compliance program to get credit, and for us to peel back, you better have a compliance program. I know what a compliance program is meant to do. You have to have the highest integrity. You have to be following your manual. You have to be enforcing your compliance manual. Because if you just have a sham, we're going to find out, and we're just going to pull the curtain back on you immediately.
Well, and we'll talk about the compliance in a little bit, but real quick, one thing. This Department of Justice now, not only do you have to have a compliance plan, and they're going to look at that compliance plan, but now one of the factors they look at is, are you actually enforcing the compliance plan? And we'll talk about that. But it's no longer just, hey, I got a compliance plan, check it off the list, I'm good to go. What is the company doing in relation to the compliance plan after bad acts have been found?
Well, in any event, I think the point about sanctions, I think her statement, for any business with an international supply chain, sanctions should be at the forefront of its approach to compliance. Now, is there a business that doesn't have an international supply chain? So this is, and to say that something's going to be the new FCPA, it's extraordinary. When I started in practice, nobody knew what those initials meant. It was passed in 1977.
We couldn't even spell it back then.
Yeah, I would have thought it was a friendly certified public accountant. But in any event, it lay dormant literally till 2007. And then in 2007, enforcement picked up dramatically. And these are just, a few of the largest settlements. And I will say this, well, we can talk about it a bit later. I don't know that there's been an FCPA case tried because it's, frankly, the stakes are so high, treble damages, that, if you've got an FCPA issue, a company's not got a lot of leverage. But in any event, Stanford has charted FCPA data, and I think, again, for her to say sanctions will be the new FCPA, let's take a look at what happened with the FCPA. It sat there for 30 years, rarely used. And then beginning in 2007, somebody at DOJ discovered, wow, this is a pretty powerful corporate enforcement tool. And so in any event, take that to heart, what she said about sanctions. And again, whatever business you're in, it doesn't really matter. Take a look at where FCPA enforcement has been. And again, if we're to expect the same thing in sanctions enforcement, if you're in oil and gas, if you're in healthcare, if you're in technology, aerospace, defense, financial services, communication services, I mean, it runs the gamut. And Walt, obviously, cybersecurity is a huge issue. Can you tell us what the plan is there?
Sure, and I just met someone from Toyota in data privacy, so she knows what I'm going to do. I should let her do this slide. But what we're talking about here is you can see the numbers. You all see these numbers going up, up, up. The costs are going up. Interesting numbers just came out about a month ago from 2022, and there actually was a drop in ransomware, successful ransomware attacks and ransomware payments, which was a shock. This is the first time in years and years. So what can we accredit that to, right? Well, one, we can credit to your companies because now we've all been through this so many times. We've all been breached at one point or another. You have safer backups, without a doubt. Y'all are doing the right thing.
If you don't, you better get them.
Right. Whether it's in the cloud's giving us better security. Everyone's doing backup service. So, hats off to that win. The second one is people are just not paying anymore. Right? People are saying this is wrong. These are probably criminals from a different country. I'm just not going to pay them anymore. We'll figure this out. And is it a combination of the two? The FBI has really kind of come out. Used to, Christopher Wray, when he came out, would say, look, we understand if you have to make these payments. Now the FBI is actively discouraging you from paying these ransomware payments.
Interesting. Well, that's obviously a developing area of the law. But just because these can't be left out, DOJ long ago discovered healthcare enforcement. And again, how an area of enforcement, it really, I think, at least the apocryphal story is it was the U.S. Attorney's Office in Boston and an AUSA named Mike Laux who kind of discovered, wow, there's use of the False Claims Act in healthcare, and he started a trend. And so there are DOJ healthcare fraud strike forces, really Dallas, there's one here, National Rapid Response Strike Force, Mike, and of course False Claims Act, treble damages. So those are huge areas of enforcement. Mike, you want to share any thoughts about these recent numbers on the False Claims Act?
Yeah, again, this just shows you where they're putting their priorities. The 11 regional task forces is actually pretty recent. I think it was in 2006 they started these healthcare strike forces around the country. In Mississippi, we have the Gulf Coast strike force that we were involved in. We had a compounding pharmacy case down in Mississippi that involved about $1 billion in healthcare fraud with TRICARE and other providers. And so you're seeing these all around the country. The strike forces are led by Department of Justice attorneys working with the local AUSAs and the U.S. Attorney's offices. They've been incredibly effective. On the False Claims Act, it's kind of like the FCPA. It passed, I think, during the Civil War because people were stealing supplies or ripping off the government on supplies. I think it was called Lincoln's Act. But it pretty much lay dormant for almost a century. And over the last few years, it has exploded. And you'll see in that slide, almost 80% of False Claims Act cases are related to healthcare. And that $2.2 billion number for FY22, I think that was the largest, the second largest in history. So again, it's not just the criminal, unfortunately for you guys, it's not just the criminal prosecutors that are being much more involved, but now you have the civil AUSAs bringing False Claims Act cases.
Like Candace, so she's to blame for that.
I was actually going to say something about one of the things that they mentioned at the conference in Miami was their eyes on teaching hospitals. where surgeons are teaching several residents in an operating room and some of the False Claims Act cases that are coming out of there. So if you represent any of those hospitals or in a city where those hospitals are in large numbers, like in Mississippi, I think that you should know that also.
Well, the big, I guess, new area for False Claims Act right now is the PPP loans. You see that all over the country, and it's not just the guys or gals who took PPP loans and bought Lamborghinis and Ferraris and stuff like that. These are actually those who are falsifying their records, falsifying their payrolls, falsifying whatever to get the loans forgiven. I mean, PPP loan and unemployment insurance, those are going to be two huge things over the next few years. We had a question.
So, yeah, just a quick question. So in the financial services world, I know like a lot of the AGs would coordinate with each other and have multi-state AG kind of cases. In the AUSA world, like if you're in problem with one state, this is not the case for my company.
Yeah, sir, would you tell us your company again?
Hey, anything that's said here stays here.
This is Vegas.
Yeah.
But is the reality that the AUSAs or the USAs, are they all talking to each other and sharing
they're
data
not.
across the states?
My experience was they were not.
The AUSAs aren't, but I think the point being, I think these strike forces are.
Yes.
And similarly, FCPA, Mike mentioned he hadn't prosecuted one. Actually, those generally aren't prosecuted by U.S. attorneys' offices. That's a centralized unit in DOJ. So I think some of those specialized units may be talking across jurisdictions.
And it really depends on the case. I mean, if it's FCPA, if it's one of the strike forces, if it's local white collar crime, and you have a company that has multiple, operates in multiple states, and there might be multiple bad acts in other states, then that AUSA would probably get main justice involved. Or I know this is hard to believe, but sometimes there's been fights among U.S. attorneys' offices trying to get big cases, i.e. WorldCom a few years ago, Southern District of Mississippi. Southern District of New York beat out Southern District of Mississippi for that one, by the way. A little guy named Jim Comey. But anyway, no hard feelings. It's been 30 years, that's fine. But anyway, so I wish there were more coordination among U.S. attorneys' offices, but really, if it gets something like that, you have to get main justice involved, and usually main justice will just take it over. So.
I certainly remember a battle, Walt, between your predecessor, Ray LaMonica, and our partner, Harry Rosenberg, years ago over a big case. In any event, I think most of you probably are aware of this now, and your companies have in place compliance programs. If they don't, beware. Really, DOJ's been sending this message for 20 years now. You've got to have a compliance program in place. And I think with publicly traded companies, they pretty much, as far as I know, generally all do. But there are closely held companies where I'm surprised sometimes that there aren't compliance programs. Frankly, the thing we've been dealing with recently, Mike. And why is it the only answer? First, corporate criminal liability is extraordinarily broad. Any employee, now this is not true under Texas state law as to felonies, but in federal law, any employee's criminal act can be held against the corporation if it is, in part for the corporation's benefit. And that has been very broadly interpreted. And even in the US v. Bank of New England case, corporate mens rea was established. And in that case, a number of bank employees were indicted for structuring. And they went to trial, and they were all found not guilty. Every person within the company was found not guilty, but the company was found guilty. How can that be? Because they were given a jury instruction, which was upheld on appeal, saying that even if no one in the company had criminal intent, if you added up the knowledge of everyone in the company into some fictional being, if that would constitute criminal mens rea, the company's liable. And of course, again, you know this, look, defending a corporate indictment is bad for business. There's reputational harm. You have often senior people distracted. It affects morale. And look, Arthur Andersen, there's a case where the company went under, 35,000 people lost their jobs, and yet after a conviction, the Supreme Court reversed Arthur Andersen's conviction 9-0. But they didn't help the company. And in any event, I think time is a little bit short, so we're not going to go into this, but Principles of Federal Prosecution of Business Organizations list the factors that DOJ will consider in bringing charges. It's on the web. If you just type in Justice Manual or even just Principles of Federal Prosecution of Business Organizations, it'll come up, and it's worth giving it a read.
Sean, real quick, we did title that slide "Compliance is the Only Answer," so I feel like I need to tell you a little bit more. Monaco said in her memo that it's not only what is your compliance program at the time of the criminal offense. It's also what is your compliance program at the time DOJ makes its charging decision. So there's a window where the companies can try to get it right, even if you don't have a compliance program in place when the bad act happens. Now, I will tell you, Monaco and this department has done some things that have never been done before with regard to compliance. One is, we've already mentioned, they're going to look at the details, the meat, the guts of your compliance program to see exactly what it does. Specifically, as Candace mentioned, whether you have provisions in your compliance program that claw back compensation from your executives if they were at fault or if they were involved. That's the first time ever we've had clawback requirements that DOJ is mandating. In addition to that, I mentioned this earlier, what is the company doing now that you found the bad acts with regard to your compliance program? Are you actually clawing back that money from executives? And DOJ considers that action as to whether the company should get a good deal. The last thing I'll tell you about compliance, that this is extraordinary to me. In Monaco's speech back in 2021 in her new memo, she also said that your compliance program has to have principles or instructions governing personal devices and third-party messaging platforms. So if your employees are using their personal phones or using WhatsApp to do business and commit bad acts, your compliance program now has to address those things. And if it doesn't, you are penalized by the Department of Justice.
And by the way, I have to say, my son's an investment banker in New York, and he works for Deutsche Bank, and he has a company phone, and he won't tell me anything about his job. So I'm happy.
And you don't have to say anything else either, Sean.
He won't tell me anything. I taught him well. So listen, let me ask maybe Walt and Candace if you could comment. Obviously, and this is more than a sales pitch for us to redesign your compliance program and conduct your internal investigations. But part of a compliance program is that when there is a hint of wrongdoing, it has to be investigated. But if you do it the wrong way, you can cause more problems than are created. Let me ask you, Walt, just in terms of gathering information, in interviewing employees, are there particular techniques that you use?
Sure. And of course, everyone, the first thing right out of the bat when you want to talk to a corporate witness is give the correct Upjohn warnings. Make sure those are in your recorded, either in your recorded interview or your written result of interview. Make sure those are in there, so make sure that that's protected. I would say, of course, no offense to any in-house counsel, but when I was at DOJ, if I got an internal report or internal disclosure from someone within the company, it didn't hold the same weight as someone independent outside the company. Not that it wasn't every fact they said was true. Both reports could have mirrored the same if you let each person did it. But you're like, hey, this is an outsider. Phelps is putting their name on it. They're gonna put their reputation on it. They're giving me their word. This is true. So it just created a little bit of space. Like in-house counsels, y'all certainly work every day with the C-suite. You're working with the presidents. And then sometimes these investigations come up, right? They're going to turn up things you don't really want to hear. And it may not even be the very crux of the investigation that you're working on. But you may come up, if you're working on a FCPA case, you may, when you delve into it, you may find out there's issues in HR. You may find there's something in EPA. So once you find that out, you certainly want to flesh that out as well. And then when someone from Phelps or another firm goes to DOJ, especially I think us, not to brag on us, but we do have relationships and they know we have the same experiences. We're telling them this is the company's word and this is our word and we're here to fix it.
And you know, one thing I would mention in that regard is sometimes to conduct an internal investigation, you may not want to use your go-to law firm for, say, litigation.
Excuse me, unless it's Phelps.
yeah, sure. Or corporate matters, because whoever conducts that internal investigation can become a witness. Because if the person gets indicted and goes to trial, statements they've made in an interview, and on that point, I just want to emphasize Upjohn, because I have known and seen attorneys who got really in a bad way because they failed to give proper Upjohn warnings. And so make sure if you're interviewing corporate employees, they understand that you represent the company, not them. That because they're a company employee, the conversation is privileged. But the privilege belongs to the company, and therefore the company can choose to waive it. And I can't emphasize enough what an ethical problem that can create if one fails to give proper Upjohn warnings.
And Sean, real quick, to Walt's point, when you come in to a U.S. Attorney's Office or the DOJ with an outside counsel who's done an internal investigation for you, it's just human nature that I think that government prosecutor, that federal prosecutor, is going to look at who your outside counsel was. And if your outside counsel was a former assistant U.S. attorney or a former U.S. attorney, they may get a little more leeway. They may get a little more respect, if you will.
I think that, look, they're going to trust that this is somebody who's telling me the truth. And maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but I do think most of us who've been at DOJ, we want to maintain our credibility with them. And I think that does make sense. So in any event, we have gone, how long?
An hour.
Too long?
Well, I think we're at about 50. Okay, so we have a hypothetical, and we were going to, if we had additional
do we want to
time.
just open it up for questions? They probably.
Yeah, well, yeah, I was going to say it's a great hypothetical.
Sean wrote it.
Oh, hypothetical? Or,
Questions? Okay.
can we take a vote? Okay, we'll go with questions, but if you want the hypothetical, Sean, SHAUN .Clarke, CLARKE @Phelps.com, and I'll send it to you.
Questions?
Is there a quote on questions for supposed to like?
Sure.
Well, if you ask 3, that's probable cause.
No, here's my card. Yeah.
These are actually just, I'm interested because, sometimes the investigation that's happening from the government is actually like you may get a subpoena and you're just a witness. You are not actually
Right.
the target,
Right.
using the terms. And I've always wondered, that witness has to incur quite a lot of expenses to go ahead and cooperate with the government agency. I know you can't fight the government agency. I'm not going to do it. Like you can try to narrow the scope,
Right.
And you can try to kind of limit it. And I get all that part. But you guys have been on the other side a lot, and maybe are there any tricks of the trade or techniques that you would say, in addition to using great outside counsel like Phelps, to go ahead and represent you?
Would you say that again?
In addition to, are there tricks of the trade that actually you increase your chances of being able to narrow the scope as a witness of the information that you're providing?
Go ahead.
I was looking at them thinking no. I think that's always a slippery slope when you go into the office without that credible face or someone that they trust, because that interview opportunity as a prosecutor, when I know you're coming in, that's my chance to sit with my agent and get as much as I can in that moment.
And the problem is, you really don't, as a witness, you're coming in, you really don't know what they're going to ask or what rabbit hole they're going down. When you come in as a witness, you have no control. Unless
this informational request, sometimes they kind of
So I would.
cast this white web.
right.
Here's my thought on that. Frankly, the first thing you do is you find out. You ask them what's my status at the current time. And generally speaking, AUSAs are willing to work with particularly counsel for witnesses. They're not trying to make your life difficult. But I'll just close quickly with a story. I became an AUSA, I guess it was 1992, and maybe 3 weeks later, I'd been handed in this investigation of a defense contractor, and I hadn't even read the file. And all of a sudden, the phone rings, and I'm told it's Ed Dennis on the line. And I'm like, Ed Dennis, because he had been a former assistant attorney general, the position Ken Poley now finds. I'm a junior AUSA with no windows in my office. and Ed Dennis is calling, and I don't want to say begging me to meet with him, but pleading with me to meet with him. And now, having been in private practice, I understand, an individual AUSA, in some respects, on a case, maybe even more than the U.S. attorney themselves, with the day-to-day nitty-gritty, has enormous power and discretion. So it is a good idea to walk softly. Don't pick a fight until and unless you have to. And you probably don't have to before the day of an indictment. So other questions? Well, you got your hour of CLE, and we enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank y'all.